Some feelings appear exactly when we pretend they do not exist. Where will our clever fate lead us if we keep refusing to listen to ourselves? The ministry ballroom glittered like it had been polished with magic itself, which Hermione supposed it probably had. Chandeliers shimmered above, their light refracted in hundreds of cut crystal drops, scattering soft golden hues across the room. Laughter and polite conversation mingled with the sound of floating violins. She stood near one of the tall arched windows, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand, wishing she were anywhere else. It wasn't that she disliked these events. Once upon a time, she'd believed in them, in the idea that unity could be fostered through shared space, shared conversation. But after years of smiling through speeches and watching the same pure-blood families whisper behind fans about integration, Hermione had learned to temper her optimism. Some wounds, she knew, didn't heal neatly. And tonight, one of those wounds had just walked into the room. Draco Malfoy. She felt it before she saw him. A hush of awareness prickling down her spine, a subtle shift in the air. Then came the soft murmur from nearby witches, the half-curious, half-disapproving glances that rippled through the crowd. He was dressed immaculately, of course. Tailored black robes, a silver clasp at his throat, that familiar air of effortless arrogance that had once driven her mad. But something was different. The boy she remembered had always looked untouchable, smooth, polished, sneering. The man walking across the ballroom floor looked brittle somehow, like marble that had begun to crack beneath its own weight. Their eyes met across the crowd. Hermione stiffened, heart thudding, forcing herself not to look away first. The corners of his mouth curved into the faintest smirk, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, and he inclined his head in silent acknowledgement before turning to greet the minister. She exhaled slowly. "Of course," she muttered under her breath. "He'd show up tonight." "Talking to yourself again, Granger?" came a voice behind her. She turned sharply. Blaise Zabini stood there, wineglass in hand, looking entirely too amused. "Old habits die hard," she said coolly. He chuckled. "So do old grudges, it seems, though I'd say Malfoy's changed more than most." Hermione raised an eyebrow. Changed, or learned to fake sincerity better than before? Zabini's lips quirked. Maybe both. He swirled his wine, eyes drifting toward where Draco stood, now surrounded by a circle of ministry officials. "Though, between us, he's not here to mingle. He's here because he's desperate." That caught her off guard. Desperate? Zabini gave her a sly look. "Let's just say the Malfoy name isn't as secure as it used to be. Word is, someone's been leaking old files to the press. Not flattering ones. He needs a miracle if he wants to keep his family out of the scandal pages." Hermione frowned. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because, Granger," Zabini said with a knowing smile, "I think you might be his miracle." She didn't have time to ask what he meant. A soft murmur spread through the ballroom, and suddenly Draco himself was there, standing before her, every line of his face perfectly composed. "Granger," he greeted, his voice smooth, low. "Malfoy." He glanced briefly at Zabini. "If you don't mind, I'd like a moment with Miss Granger." Zabini smirked, raising his glass in farewell. Don't kill each other. Once they were alone, or as alone as one could be in a ballroom full of watchful eyes, Hermione crossed her arms. "What do you want, Malfoy?" "Straight to the point," he murmured. "How very Gryffindor of you. I take it this isn't a social call." His expression shifted just slightly, the faintest flicker of tension in his jaw. "No, it's complicated, but I need your help." Her eyes narrowed. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" He didn't. His gaze was steady, too controlled, like someone who'd practiced this conversation 100 times. "Help," she repeated, incredulous. "You are asking me for help?" "Yes." "And what kind of help could you possibly need from me?" There was a long pause. Then he said it. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." The words hit her like a spell. I'm sorry. What?" Draco's expression didn't waver. "Just for a few weeks, until the end of the social season." Hermione blinked, sure she'd misheard him. "You can't possibly expect—" "I wouldn't ask if there were another option." His tone sharpened. "But if certain rumors aren't extinguished, the Ministry could reopen old cases. My family's already hanging by a thread, Granger. This," he gestured between them, "could make them back off." Her indignation flared. "You want to use me as your political shield?" He winced. "Not in those words." "Then in what words exactly?" Something flickered in his eyes, a tiredness that didn't match his usual arrogance. "You're respected, untouchable. If people believe I'm engaged to you, it changes the narrative. It means the Malfoys have changed." Hermione stared at him, torn between outrage and an odd, reluctant pity. "You're unbelievable," she said finally. "Perhaps, but I'm also right." The ballroom felt suddenly too bright, too close. She turned away, needing distance, needing to breathe. "And why on earth would I ever agree to that?" His voice softened, unexpectedly. "Because you still believe in second chances." She froze. He took a careful step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've spent years fighting for equality, for redemption, for the idea that people can be more than their mistakes. Let me prove that I can be one of them." Her pulse quickened, confusion tangling with anger. It was absurd, impossible, and yet, when she finally met his gaze again, she saw something raw there. Not arrogance, not manipulation, something closer to desperation. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. He nodded once, relief flickering in his eyes. "That's all I ask." As he walked away, leaving her in the soft hum of the ballroom, Hermione realized her hands were trembling. It wasn't the proposal itself that unsettled her. It was the sinking feeling that somehow she already knew she wouldn't be able to say no. And that terrified her more than anything. Hermione didn't sleep that night. She sat in her flat long after midnight, parchments scattered across the table, a half-empty teacup gone cold at her elbow. She told herself she was working, reviewing ministry documents, organizing notes for the upcoming conference. But every thought circled back to the same maddening image. Draco Malfoy standing beneath the chandeliers, calm, elegant, and utterly impossible, saying the words "pretend to be my fiancé." The audacity of it. And yet, the more she thought about his face in that moment, the tightness around his mouth, the faint tremor in his hand as he'd adjusted his cufflinks, the less certain she felt. He hadn't looked smug. He'd looked cornered. That was dangerous. Empathy was dangerous, especially when it came to him. By morning, she'd almost convinced herself to forget the whole thing. Almost. Until a letter arrived. It was hand-delivered by an owl she didn't recognize, sealed with silver wax bearing the Malfoy crest. She hesitated before opening it, staring at the serpent intertwined with the ornate M. Then, with a resigned sigh, she broke the seal. "Granger, I won't waste your time with flattery or persuasion. I'll be at the Leontine tea room at noon. If you wish to refuse me, do it in person. I'd rather you hex me to my face than through parchment." D. Malfoy. Hermione groaned aloud, pressing her forehead to the table. Of course, he'd pick the most public place possible. By noon, she was regretting every decision that had brought her here. The Leontine tea room was all marble floors and fluttering lace curtains, filled with witches in pastel robes, sipping tea from china cups. Draco was already there, sitting at a corner table near the window, posture perfect, expression unreadable. When he saw her, he stood at once. "Granger." "Malfoy." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," she said dryly, sitting down. A waitress flitted over to pour tea. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Finally, Hermione crossed her arms. "All right. You have 5 minutes. Explain why I shouldn't walk out right now." He didn't flinch. "Because, whether you like it or not, this affects you too." Her brow furrowed. "How?" He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "The Unity Initiative. You're its most public advocate. If this scandal grows, it'll damage everything you've built. People will start asking whether reform is even possible, whether those like me can really change." Her lips parted, ready to retort, but the argument caught somewhere in her throat. Damn him, he had a point. "Don't look so triumphant," she muttered. "I'm not," he said softly. "I hate that I need to ask you for this, but I'd rather owe you a debt than see my family dragged through the mud again." Something about the quiet sincerity in his tone made her uneasy. It was easier when he was arrogant, when she could hate him cleanly. Hermione looked away, watching the rain slide down the window. "You really think people will believe we're engaged?" "They will," he said, "if we make them." Her heart thudded. "You've thought this through." "Of course I have." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "If I'm going to humiliate myself by asking you, I might as well have a plan." She shot him a look. "You're remarkably bad at persuasion. And yet, you're still here." Her cheeks heated. Pure coincidence. He tilted his head, studying her for a long moment. Then, his voice softened again. "I know what you think of me. You have every right to think it. But if you agree, I'll make it worth your while." Her eyes narrowed. "If you mean money—" "I don't," he interrupted quickly. "What I mean is, I'll cooperate with your next Muggle rights bill, publicly. You'd have the Malfoy name attached to it." That silenced her. He knew exactly which button to press. "I see," she said slowly. "So this would be mutually beneficial?" "Yes." Hermione sipped her tea, though her hands were trembling slightly. "And what exactly would this arrangement involve?" He hesitated. "Appearances at events, a few joint interviews, possibly some photographs for the Prophet." She gave him a sharp look. "Photographs?" "Nothing indecent," he said, smirking faintly. "Just the usual. Smiles, hand-holding, a few rehearsed moments of domestic bliss." Hermione nearly choked on her tea. Domestic bliss? "Relax, Granger. I won't make you move into the manor. Merlin forbid." Her glare could have scorched the tablecloth. "You're insufferable. And you're predictable." His smirk faltered, replaced by something almost apologetic. "But I trust you. Or at least, I trust you more than anyone else to do this honestly." For a moment, silence stretched between them, tense, uncertain. Hermione studied him carefully. The guarded eyes, the faint shadows beneath them, the way his hands rested perfectly still on the table. Everything about him screamed control, except for the faint tremor in his voice when he said her name. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "You already are." She glared at him, but the words were true. By the next afternoon, she gave in. The official press release went out within hours. Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy announce engagement, symbol of post-war unity. The headlines spread like fiendfire. Within a day, the wizarding world was ablaze. Hermione regretted everything. Her inbox flooded with messages. Ginny sent a howler that nearly blew out her window. Harry demanded explanations over dinner, while Ron sat in stunned silence until muttering something about losing his appetite. Through it all, Draco remained irritatingly calm. Their first public appearance as a couple was at a ministry gala 3 nights later. Hermione arrived in a deep emerald gown, nerves coiling tight in her chest. Reporters swarmed them the moment they stepped inside, flashbulbs bursting like fireworks. Draco offered his arm. "Smile," he murmured through clenched teeth. "I am smiling," she hissed. "It looks like you're in pain." "Because I am." He almost laughed. Almost. But then a photographer shouted for them to look at each other, and everything shifted. For a split second, their eyes met. Hermione's breath caught. The world blurred. The crowd, the lights, the clicking cameras. There was only him. The faint scent of sandalwood and ink. The warmth of his hand beneath hers. The quiet intensity in his gaze, so unguarded it frightened her. Then he looked away, the mask slipping back into place. The rest of the evening was a blur of polite conversation and forced smiles. Yet every time someone congratulated them, every time Draco's hand brushed hers for effect, Hermione's heart betrayed her, beating faster, louder. When the night finally ended, she found him waiting at the door. "You handled it well," he said quietly. She crossed her arms. "You mean I didn't hex anyone?" "That too." He hesitated. "I know this isn't easy for you. It isn't easy for either of us." He nodded, something unreadable in his eyes. "Good night, Granger." As he turned to leave, she found herself calling after him. "Malfoy." He paused, glancing back. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Out of everyone you could have chosen." For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said simply, "Because you're the only one I can't lie to." And before she could speak, he was gone. Hermione stood alone in the corridor, her heart thundering in her chest. It was all supposed to be pretend, a performance, nothing more. So why, already, did it feel so dangerously real? By the end of the first week, Hermione was ready to strangle him. Draco Malfoy was, without exaggeration, the most infuriating man alive. He was punctual, polite, impeccably dressed, and utterly insufferable. Every appearance they made together was a battle of wills disguised as civility. Every photograph was a study in controlled tension. And yet, the world loved them. The prophet called them the symbol of post-war reconciliation. Witches whispered about their chemistry at luncheons. Even Kingsley had congratulated her personally, his eyes warm with approval. Hermione smiled, nodded, and felt something twist in her chest. Because the whole thing was a lie. She reminded herself of that every morning, every time she caught sight of her engagement ring. A simple platinum band Draco had presented with mock solemnity in his drawing room. I had it made, he'd said, slipping it onto her finger. No sense doing this halfway. It's not real, she'd snapped, though the metal felt heavier than it should have. Of course it's not, he'd replied, eyes glinting. But they'll believe it is. The problem was, sometimes she believed it too. Their next public event was the annual Unity Ball, hosted at Malfoy Manor. Hermione almost refused outright when she heard the location. The manor still made her stomach twist. Memories she preferred buried. But Draco had insisted, his tone softer than usual. It's only for a few hours, he'd said quietly, and I'd rather you be there than anyone else. That alone unsettled her, more than she cared to admit. The night of the ball, Hermione arrived early. The grand hall had been transformed. No trace of the cold, foreboding space she remembered. The walls glowed with candlelight, garlands of white roses draped between marble columns. The music floated softly, elegant and unintrusive. Draco was waiting at the base of the staircase. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the practiced smirk, the cynical glint. He stood in tailored black robes trimmed with silver, his hair swept neatly back, looking human, vulnerable even. You look, he began, then stopped himself, jaw tightening. Appropriate. Hermione arched an eyebrow. You were about to say something else. Consider it unsaid. Coward. A faint smirk ghosted his lips. Only where you're concerned. It was a fleeting exchange, but it left her pulse unsteady. As the evening progressed, they played their roles flawlessly. Draco guided her through the crowd, hand resting lightly at her back. Every touch was calculated, every look rehearsed. And yet, every time his fingers brushed her skin, she felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. She wasn't supposed to notice the way he leaned close when speaking, his voice dipping low enough that only she could hear. She wasn't supposed to care that his laughter, rare and restrained, sounded less like mockery now and more like something genuine. And yet, she did. Merlin help her, she did. Halfway through the evening, a familiar voice shattered her composure. Granger, didn't expect to see you here. She turned to find Ron approaching, his smile too forced, his posture too stiff. He looked uncomfortable in his dress robes, as though the manor itself disapproved of his presence. Ron, she said, surprised. What are you doing here? Work, he muttered. Oral assignment, routine security. But when I saw the guest list, his eyes flicked to Draco, narrowing. Didn't realize you'd gone this far with the act. Draco's expression remained cool. We're full of surprises, Weasley. Ron's jaw clenched. You call this a surprise. I call it lunacy. What's next? A honeymoon? Hermione stepped between them before the air could ignite. Ron, please, not here. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. You can't tell me this is real, Hermione. Her voice wavered. It's complicated. Draco's voice cut through, silk over steel. I think it's quite simple. You don't have to like it, Weasley, but you do have to leave her alone about it. Ron's fists tightened, but Hermione shook her head sharply. Don't. For a moment, the three of them stood in brittle silence, old wounds breathing beneath the surface. Then Ron exhaled, muttered something about duty, and walked away. Hermione turned on Draco the moment Ron was out of earshot. You didn't have to antagonize him. I wasn't antagonizing. I was defending. She glared. You were provoking. Semantics, he said lightly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. He doesn't get to treat you like you're incapable of choosing for yourself. Her anger faltered. Why do you care? For a heartbeat, his composure cracked. Because I know what it's like to be treated as though you'll never be forgiven. The words hung between them, fragile and real. Hermione's chest tightened. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Hermione slipped out onto the terrace to breathe. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of night-blooming roses. She rested her hands on the stone balustrade, letting the quiet wash over her. Running away from the crowd. Draco's voice came from behind her, soft and steady. She didn't turn. Just needed air. He joined her, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. You handled yourself well tonight. Except for the part where Ron nearly punched you. I've had worse. His tone was light, but his eyes were distant. Do you hate me for asking you to do this? Hermione hesitated. I don't know, she said honestly. Sometimes I think I do, and then sometimes I don't. He nodded, gaze fixed on the dark garden below. That's fair. Silence stretched, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. Finally, she said, Why did you really do it, Draco? It can't just be about reputation. He looked at her then, and for once she saw no mask. Because I wanted a chance to be someone else, even if it's only pretend. Something inside her shifted. The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability, it disarmed her completely. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. It was a small gesture, hesitant, fleeting, but his hand turned, fingers closing gently around hers. The contact sent a spark through her, warm, startling. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world narrowed to that single point of connection, the soft brush of skin, the shared heartbeat between them. Then she pulled away, stepping back as though burned. This is getting too real. He didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed, low and rough. Maybe it already is. Back in her flat later that night, Hermione stared at her reflection in the mirror. The engagement ring gleamed faintly under the lamplight, cold and beautiful. She told herself this was strategy, politics, optics. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the echo of his touch. And that, she realized with a sinking heart, was far more dangerous than any scandal. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. They met for public events, rehearsed smiles for photographers, and exchanged lines of dialogue that had become second nature. You look lovely tonight, Granger. And you, Malfoy, are surprisingly tolerable. The audience believed it. Their laughter, their whispers, the soft headlines that praised the unexpected tenderness between old enemies. It was an act, they reminded themselves, an illusion. But somewhere between rehearsed touches and 2 long glances, the edges began to blur. Hermione felt it first during a charity dinner for the Unity Fund. She was seated beside Draco at the long mahogany table, his hand resting lightly over hers as they listened to speeches about post-war reconciliation. His thumb brushed absently against her knuckles, almost unconsciously. The motion was small, innocent. And yet, it sent a strange shiver through her, a pulse of warmth that tangled with guilt. When she looked at him, his face was perfectly composed, but his eyes flicked toward her hand as though he hadn't meant to do it either. After the dinner, she tried to tell herself it meant nothing. Habit, performance, coincidence. But her heart refused to listen. 3 nights later, They had another appearance to endure, a smaller affair at the Ministry archives where Draco was expected to make a speech about legacy and reform. Hermione arrived early to find him pacing in front of the grand fireplace, looking uncharacteristically unsettled. "I didn't take you for the nervous type," she teased lightly. "I'm not nervous," he muttered, though his tone betrayed him. "I'm reconsidering my life choices." Hermione smiled despite herself. "Too late for that. You're already here, and so am I." He glanced at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You make it sound like a sentence, isn't it?" "Perhaps," he said softly, "but I find myself less opposed to the imprisonment than I expected." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Hermione turned away, pretending to study the ornate paintings on the wall, but her heart was beating too fast. When he finally gave his speech, he spoke with quiet conviction. Gone was the defensive arrogance she'd expected. Instead, he spoke of rebuilding trust, of learning to listen, of the slow work of change. The room was silent when he finished. Then applause swelled, polite and approving. Hermione felt a swell of something unexpected. Pride. Later, as they left the archives, she said quietly, "You were brilliant tonight." Draco's lips curved faintly. "Careful, Granger. Compliments from you are rare and might give me unrealistic expectations." "You're impossible." "And yet," he said, opening the carriage door for her, "you keep showing up." She didn't answer, but the silence that followed was thick with meaning neither dared name. The next morning, the Daily Prophet printed a photograph of them leaving the event together, heads tilted toward each other, smiles soft and unguarded. The headline read, "Love or Politics? Malfoy and Granger's gaze speaks volumes." Hermione nearly choked on her tea. "They make it sound like we're madly in love," Draco finished, leaning casually against her office doorway. "It's working then." She scowled. "I don't find this amusing." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No, but you're blushing, which is infinitely more entertaining." Her cheeks burned. "You're insufferable." "I've been called worse." He smiled, but there was a strange softness behind it, something uncertain. When she looked at him too long, she caught a flicker of weariness in his eyes, as though the facade was heavier for him than he ever let on. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked quietly. For once, he didn't deflect. "All the time." Their eyes met. Something fragile and electric passed between them. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "We have another event tonight. Don't be late." The event that night was a charity auction at the Wizarding Museum. Hermione told herself she was ready, that she could keep her emotions under control. But the moment Draco arrived, sharp in his dark robes, his silver cufflinks catching the light, her resolve wavered. He offered her his arm with a quiet, "Shall we, fiancé?" She took it, too easily. The evening began smoothly enough. They smiled. They bid on enchanted trinkets. They performed the charade they'd perfected. But when one of the witches at their table, a blonde socialite named Astoria Greengrass, leaned forward and placed her hand lightly on Draco's arm, Hermione felt something ugly and unfamiliar twist in her chest. Jealousy. It startled her. She had no right to feel it. This wasn't real. But when Draco smiled back, politely, distantly, it didn't matter. The image burned. She excused herself soon after, stepping into the courtyard for air. The night was cold, and she drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Running away again. Draco's voice followed her. She turned sharply. I needed a moment. He stepped into the moonlight, his expression unreadable. From what? The crowd, or me? Does it matter? She said, her tone sharper than intended. Apparently it does, he said quietly. You've been glaring at me all evening. Maybe I'm tired of pretending to enjoy your company. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Then why do you look at me like that? Like what? Like you hate that you don't hate me anymore. The words struck deep, too close to the truth. She turned away, throat tight. You're imagining things. I'm not. His voice softened. And neither are you. Silence fell between them, heavy and charged. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, feel the distance between them shrinking. Don't, she whispered as he took a step closer. Why not? Because this isn't real. Then tell me to stop, he said, voice barely audible. She didn't, couldn't. His hand came up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was light, reverent, hesitant. Her breath hitched. Draco. His name felt strange on her tongue, soft and intimate. His gaze flicked to her lips, then back to her eyes. Tell me you don't feel it, he murmured. She tried. The words refused to come. Then, as if realizing what he was about to do, he stepped back abruptly, every muscle in his body tense. We can't, he said, the words raw. Not when the whole world is watching. Her chest ached. You started this, and I'm ending it before it destroys us both. He turned, disappearing into the shadows, leaving her alone under the pale glow of the moon. Hermione pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. She hated him for confusing her. She hated herself more for wishing he hadn't stopped. When she returned inside, the noise of the crowd swallowed her. Smiles, laughter, champagne, everything bright and shallow. But she felt hollow, like something essential had cracked open. From across the room, Draco caught her eye. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. She saw the same turmoil in his expression that mirrored her own. And in that fleeting glance, Hermione realized something terrifying. The performance had become the truth, and neither of them knew how to stop it anymore. The next morning brought silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the sharp, echoing silence that settles after something breaks and no one dares acknowledge it. Hermione hadn't seen Draco since the night of the auction. He'd left early, vanished before the last toast, and hadn't sent a single owl since. The prophet, of course, filled the void with its usual speculation. Rumours of a lover's quarrel, whispers of tension between the golden muggle-born and the fallen aristocrat. Every headline felt like salt in a wound she shouldn't have had in the first place. It wasn't supposed to hurt. It wasn't supposed to feel real. She tried to bury herself in work, meetings, research, letters to foreign embassies about educational reform. But every time she caught her reflection, saw that faint gleam of silver on her finger, her stomach twisted. When she finally saw him again, it wasn't by choice. The ministry had called an emergency press conference regarding the Unity Initiative. Draco, as a public representative of post-war reconciliation, was required to attend. So was she. Hermione arrived early, determined to appear composed. The conference room buzzed with journalists, officials, and too many curious eyes. She was reviewing her notes when she felt the now familiar pull of his presence. Draco entered quietly, drawing attention without effort. He looked composed as ever, but there was something different. His expression colder, sharper, like he'd rebuilt his armor overnight. "Granger," he greeted evenly, taking the seat beside her. "Malfoy." Her voice was equally neutral. Neither looked at the other. The press conference dragged on in a blur of questions and rehearsed answers. They played their parts flawlessly, smiling on cue, exchanging polite remarks for the cameras. Yet underneath the polished surface, tension coiled tight, every glance charged with unsaid things. When it finally ended, Hermione gathered her notes quickly, desperate to escape. But before she could leave, Draco's hand brushed her wrist, barely a touch, but enough to stop her. "Wait." She froze. "What do you want, Malfoy?" His jaw tightened. "To talk." "About what? The weather? The way you disappeared without a word?" He flinched just slightly. "That." Hermione crossed her arms. "Well, you have a strange way of apologizing." "I didn't come to apologize." "Of course you didn't." She turned to go, but his next words rooted her in place. "I stayed away because I didn't trust myself." She looked back at him slowly. "Meaning?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The gesture was unguarded, weary. "Meaning that night wasn't part of the plan. And if I'd stayed, I don't think I would have been able to keep pretending." Her throat tightened. "So, you ran away?" "Yes." For once, honesty. His gaze lifted to meet hers. "You wanted honesty. Here it is. I don't know what to do with you, Granger. I don't know how to be around you without feeling like I'm losing control of something I've spent years trying to rebuild." The confession left her speechless. He took a step closer. "And you? You look at me like I'm still the boy who made your life miserable, but you also look at me like you wish I wasn't." She forced herself to breathe. "You think you understand me?" "No," he said softly. "I think I'm starting to." Her resolve wavered. For one dizzying moment, she wanted to believe him, to believe this fragile version of him was real. But she couldn't. Not yet. She pulled her arm free. "We have a deal, Malfoy. Let's just stick to it." His voice was quiet. "If that's what you want." But when she walked away, his eyes followed her, full of a longing he didn't dare name. Days passed. Their partnership settled into uneasy rhythm again. Outwardly, nothing had changed. The world still saw them as the perfect facade. United, smiling, untouchable. But privately, they barely spoke. Every silence between them felt heavier. Every polite exchange a reminder of what they weren't saying. The next turning point came unexpectedly, as most dangerous things do. A formal dinner at the French embassy, another display of post-war harmony. Hermione arrived prepared for the usual political charade, but she wasn't prepared for the French minister's nephew, a charming wizard named Etienne Delacour, all smiles and easy grace. He was friendly, flirtatious, and, worst of all, persistent. Hermione found herself laughing at his jokes, grateful for the distraction. But she could feel Draco watching from across the table, his gaze like static against her skin. When Etienne asked her to dance, she agreed. The waltz began, light and effortless. Hermione almost relaxed, until she caught Draco's reflection in the mirrored wall. His expression was unreadable, his jaw clenched, his glass untouched. After the song ended, Etienne pressed a soft kiss to her hand, murmuring something in French that made her blush despite herself. That was when Draco stood. "Excuse us," he said smoothly, his hand closing around Hermione's wrist. Before she could protest, he led her onto the balcony, the door clicking shut behind them. The air outside was cool, scented with rain and jasmine. Hermione pulled free. "What on earth was that, Malfoy?" "You tell me," he said tightly. "You seem to be enjoying yourself." "I was being polite." "You were flirting." She glared. "Oh, and you care because I do." The words burst out before he could stop them. His eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't realized it himself until that moment. Hermione's heart thudded painfully. "Say that again." He didn't. He looked away, breathing hard. "Forget it. No, you don't get to say something like that and walk away." Draco turned back, his control unraveling. "I can't watch you with him, all right? I can't stand there and pretend it doesn't—" He broke off, fists clenching. "Merlin, this isn't supposed to be real, but it feels like it is." Hermione took a slow step toward him. "Then maybe it is." He looked at her, startled. The distance between them vanished, an invisible pull neither could resist. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his face. His breath hitched, eyes closing briefly at the contact. And then he kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't careful. It was desperate, raw, years of tension and denial snapping in an instant. Her hands found his collar, his fingers tangled in her hair. The world narrowed to the taste of rain and warmth and everything they'd tried to suppress. When they finally broke apart, Hermione was shaking. "What have we done?" Draco's voice was rough. "Something inevitable." She stepped back, panic clawing at her chest. "We can't. Draco, this isn't—" "Pretend," he said bitterly. "Tell me you felt nothing, and I'll believe you." But she couldn't. The truth burned in her silence. "I can't," she whispered. His eyes softened, something breaking in him. "Then don't." For a long moment they stood in the quiet, the storm inside both of them mirrored in the dark sky above. Finally, Hermione turned toward the door. "We'll ruin everything." "Maybe it's already ruined," he said quietly. "Maybe that's the price of feeling anything at all." She left without another word, her heart splintering under the weight of truth. Inside, the laughter of the party swelled again, oblivious. And on the balcony, Draco stood alone, head bowed, hands trembling, knowing that, for the first time in his life, he wanted something real, and that it was the one thing he could never have. The kiss changed everything. For 3 days, Hermione didn't see him. Not at the ministry, not at their scheduled appearances, not even in the papers. Draco Malfoy had vanished, just as he always did when things grew too complicated, too real. Hermione told herself it was for the best. That distance would clear her head. The time apart would remind her why she had agreed to this charade in the first place. But her thoughts betrayed her. Every quiet moment, every flicker of stillness brought him back. The warmth of his breath against her skin, the tremor in his voice when he whispered her name. She'd faced Dark Lords and Death Eaters. She'd never felt this helpless. By the 4th day, anger replaced confusion. If he thought he could disappear without explanation, he clearly didn't know her at all. So she went to find him. The Malfoy estate was shrouded in late afternoon fog, the kind that blurred the edges of everything. Hermione stood at the gates for a long moment before stepping through. She had only been here a handful of times since the war, each visit formal, rehearsed, impersonal. But today, she felt the strange pull of something personal and dangerous. When the elf opened the door, she announced herself briskly. "I need to speak with Mr. Malfoy." The elf wrung its hands. "Master Draco is not receiving guests." "I'm not a guest," Hermione said firmly. "Tell him it's Miss Granger." There was a pause. Then the elf bowed and vanished. Moments later, Draco appeared in the doorway. He looked different. His robes were unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, his expression raw with fatigue. He seemed almost startled to see her there. "Granger!" His voice was rough. "You shouldn't have come." "Then you shouldn't have disappeared," she shot back. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I needed space." "Space from what? From me? From what happened?" "Yes," he said quietly. "From both." The honesty in his tone stung more than anger would have. Hermione stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You can't just pretend it didn't happen." "That's exactly what we have to do," he said sharply. "If the press gets wind of this." "Stop hiding behind the press, Draco. This isn't about them." His eyes flicked up, grey and stormy. "Then what is it about?" "You," she whispered. "And me. And the fact that for all your control, you kissed me like you meant it." He flinched as though struck. "Don't." "Why not?" she demanded. "You can lie to everyone else, but you can't lie to me." His composure cracked. "I don't know how to be this, Hermione. I don't know how to want something I'm not allowed to have." Her breath caught. "Who says you're not allowed?" "Reality," he said bitterly. "You think the wizarding world will accept this? The savior of Muggle-born rights with a Malfoy on her arm? You'd lose everything you fought for." She took a step toward him. "Then let me decide what I'm willing to lose." The words hung between them, trembling with weight. Draco looked at her for a long moment, every emotion flickering through his eyes. Want, fear, defiance. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. Hermione swallowed hard. "Then tell me to go." He didn't. Instead, he turned away, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles whitened. "You think I don't want to," he said softly. "You think I don't imagine it, what it would be like if things were different." Hermione's heart twisted. "Then stop imagining and try." He turned back to her, eyes blazing. "You don't understand. I can't protect you from this. The moment this stops being a performance, it becomes a weapon. Against me. Against you. Maybe I'm not the one who needs protecting." Her defiance broke something in him. In 2 steps, he was standing in front of her again, close enough that she could feel the tremor in his breath. His hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped her cheek with painful gentleness. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Maybe you do," she whispered back. The air between them shimmered with everything they couldn't say. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd kiss her again, but he didn't. He stepped back, forcing the mask over his face once more. "Go home, Granger." "Don't call me that," she said quietly. He froze. "What should I call you then?" "Hermione." The sound of her name on his lips was soft, reverent. It undid her completely. She left before she could change her mind, her pulse echoing in her ears. For days afterward, she tried to function as normal. She attended meetings, spoke at rallies, smiled when people mentioned the wedding. But the world felt like it was moving without her. The worst part wasn't the confusion. It was the longing. The way she caught herself scanning crowds for him. The way her chest tightened every time she thought of his voice saying her name. When their next event finally arrived, a fundraising gala in Diagon Alley, Hermione wasn't ready. She hadn't seen him since that confrontation, and the thought of facing him in public again felt like walking into fire. He was already there when she arrived, standing near the entrance, immaculate as ever. Their eyes met across the room. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved. Then he approached, every step deliberate. "Hermione," he said quietly, so that only she could hear. The sound of her name in his voice made something inside her unravel. "Draco," she managed. They stood side by side as cameras flashed, pretending to be a couple perfectly in love. But beneath the performance, their hands found each other again, tentative, uncertain, real. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, and she felt her heartbeat skip. "Still angry with me?" he murmured. "Yes," she said softly, "but it's getting harder to remember why." He smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. "You always were terrible at hating me properly. Don't tempt me to try harder. I wouldn't dare." Their exchange was small, hidden, but it restored something between them, a fragile truce built on the ache of wanting and the fear of losing. When the night ended, they lingered by the doors, the illusion still intact for anyone watching. "You were right," Hermione said quietly. "This is dangerous. I know. And yet, he echoed, "I can't stop." She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Neither can I." The world outside the glass doors was alive with light and noise, but inside that small space between them, time felt still, balanced on the edge of something neither of them could name. The distance between pretending and truth was shrinking, and they both knew that once it disappeared completely, there would be no going back. That night, when Hermione lay awake staring at the ceiling, she realized something terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. She wasn't afraid of falling anymore. She was afraid of what would happen when she hit the ground and found him waiting there. Autumn came to London slowly, spilling golden light over the cobblestones of Diagon Alley and painting the trees in shades of copper and flame. For most people, it meant comfort. Warm cloaks, cinnamon tea, the first hints of winter holidays. For Hermione, it meant chaos. The engagement, fake though it was, had taken on a life of its own. Invitations flooded her desk. Social columns speculated on everything from her dress designer to the date of the wedding. Her name and Draco's appeared together so often that they sounded almost natural in print now. Almost, but the illusion was starting to crack. Because behind the public facade, the line between pretense and feeling had nearly vanished. And no matter how carefully Hermione tried to bury what had happened, their kiss, the quiet moments, the way his hand always found hers, she couldn't forget. She didn't know what terrified her more, that she was falling for Draco Malfoy, or that he might not be pretending anymore either. The day everything shifted again began like any other, with Draco appearing at her office door as though he owned the place. "Granger," he drawled, though the use of her surname was softer now, almost teasing. "You have an hour to look like you enjoy my company. We're late for lunch with the Wizenmagot Advisory Council." Hermione didn't look up from her parchment. "Good morning to you too, Malfoy." He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Is that what this is? Morning? I thought it was an eternal state of your irritation." She finally glanced at him, and immediately wished she hadn't. The man had no right to look that good in charcoal grey robes and a half-smile. "Flattery won't make me forgive you for vanishing for 3 days after our last event," she said. "I was dealing with ministry auditors," he said smoothly, "unless you'd rather believe I was pining for you in some dramatic fashion." She gave him a pointed look. "I think I'd believe that less." He smirked. Tragic. The banter, as always, was a game, a safe, familiar rhythm. But beneath it was something unspoken, coiled and tense. When they arrived at the council luncheon, the air was thick with politics. The advisory members wanted to discuss legislation about magical property rights, but all eyes turned when Hermione and Draco entered arm in arm. "Ah, the happy couple," one of the members exclaimed. "You two give us hope for this generation." Hermione smiled politely. Draco inclined his head, the picture of grace. To any observer, they looked like perfection, her warmth balancing his restraint, her laughter softening his edges. But as she sat beside him, Hermione noticed his hand tremble slightly when he reached for his glass. His smile didn't reach his eyes. When the speeches ended and the chatter resumed, she leaned closer. "You're quiet," she murmured. He didn't look at her. "Just tired." "Of what?" "Pretending," he said under his breath. Her heart skipped. "Then stop." His gaze flicked to hers, grey, steady, aching. "You make it sound easy." "Maybe it is," she whispered, though her voice trembled. He gave a small, hollow laugh. "For you, perhaps. You were always better at believing in impossible things." She didn't respond. Not because she disagreed, but because she didn't trust herself to. Later that week, they attended a ministry banquet celebrating the success of the Unity Initiative. The night glittered. Candles, champagne, soft music. And yet Hermione felt a weight pressing on her chest. She knew why. Every time she glanced at Draco, she saw the cracks beneath the surface widening. His posture was perfect, his words precise, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. At one point, she caught him standing alone near the balcony, staring into the distance as though the crowd no longer existed. She hesitated only a moment before approaching. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." He didn't turn. "You'd be right." She moved to stand beside him. "You could at least pretend to enjoy the evening. That's what you're good at, isn't it?" He finally looked at her. "I'm tired of pretending with you." Her breath caught. "Draco." His voice was low, rough. "Tell me what we're doing, Hermione, because I can't tell any more where the act ends and we begin." The sound of her name in his voice was almost a plea. She opened her mouth, but no words came. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Every time I look at you, I have to remind myself this isn't real, that you don't mean it, but then you smile at me like you did just now, and Merlin, I forget everything." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because you'll make me believe them." Their eyes locked, both of them trembling on the edge of something irreversible. And then someone called her name from across the hall, shattering the moment. She stepped back, her heart hammering. Draco straightened, his expression unreadable once more. "We should go back inside." Hermione nodded, though her vision swam. "Yes, we should." But neither moved. By the time the event ended, she felt drained. Emotionally, physically, impossibly. She wanted to leave, to breathe, to think. But as she slipped outside into the cool night air, Draco followed. "Hermione," he said quietly. She turned, the street lamps throwing gold light across his face. Don't, she warned. He ignored her. You keep running every time it feels real. Because it isn't supposed to be. Then tell me to stop. She hesitated. The silence stretched between them. I can't, she admitted. That was all it took. He reached out, fingers brushing her jaw, tilting her face toward his. The touch was light, uncertain, but her heart surged in response. His voice was barely a whisper. You drive me mad, Granger. Good, she breathed. Now you know how it feels. And then she kissed him. This time there was no hesitation, no fear. The world spun away. The noise, the lights, the lies. His hands slid to her waist, her fingers tangled in his hair. The kiss was desperate, born of weeks of restraint and denial finally unraveling. When they finally broke apart, her chest heaved. What now? She whispered. Draco's eyes were dark, unreadable. Now we stop pretending. Hermione searched his face, seeing for the first time the truth he'd hidden for so long. The fear, the guilt, the aching tenderness. I don't know how, she said softly. Then we'll learn, he replied. Together. For a long time they stood in silence, the night around them humming with possibility. Hermione knew this changed everything. Their agreement, their reputations, their fragile peace. It all hung in the balance. But for once, she didn't care. Because beneath the lies, beneath the performances and expectations, something real had taken root. And when Draco took her hand, fingers trembling but sure, she held on. Not for show, not for politics, but because she finally wanted to. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. For the first time since their strange arrangement had begun, the world outside felt irrelevant. Days slipped into a rhythm that was almost ordinary. Mornings filled with work, evenings spent together under the guise of an engagement that no longer needed pretense. Yet ordinary wasn't the right word for it. There was too much electricity, too much uncertainty. Every shared glance carried the memory of that kiss, and every conversation hovered dangerously close to the truth. Draco had changed. The sharp-edged arrogance that once defined him had softened into something quieter, but not weaker. He still met the world with a straight spine and a cool gaze, but Hermione could see the cracks now, the shadows that lingered in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. He'd started walking her home after late ministry sessions. He didn't say much during those walks, and she didn't press him. Sometimes silence spoke more clearly than words ever could. But there were moments, tiny, unexpected ones, that carved themselves into her memory. The way he handed her his cloak without hesitation when the wind turned cold. The way his fingers brushed hers, lingering a fraction too long. The way he said her name, like it was both an apology and a prayer. It was no longer an act. They both knew it. They just hadn't dared to admit it aloud. The shift came subtly on a rain-drenched Thursday. Hermione was in her office, surrounded by parchment towers, when the door burst open without warning. Draco stepped inside, soaked through and furious. "Do you ever read the bloody prophet before breakfast?" he demanded. She blinked up at him. "Good morning to you too." He dropped a newspaper on her desk. The front page screamed, "Sources claim Malfoy engagement a hoax." Hermione's stomach dropped. The article went on to list anonymous insiders, suggesting their relationship was a publicity stunt orchestrated by the ministry to promote unity. It quoted speculations, hinted at false declarations, even implied that she was using the Malfoy name for political gain. Her throat went dry. Who would say this? Draco's expression was grim. Someone with influence. Someone who wants to see me humiliated and you discredited. She pushed the paper aside, forcing herself to breathe. It's fine. We'll deny it, issue a joint statement. It's not fine, he snapped. You shouldn't have to defend yourself because of me. Draco, no. He cut her off, pacing like a caged animal. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid. You were right from the start. This arrangement was a mistake. Hermione rose from her chair, anger rising to match his. A mistake? You're calling everything we've done a mistake? His voice faltered. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, she said sharply. You think you're protecting me by retreating, but all you're doing is running away again. He turned to face her, his wet hair clinging to his forehead. You don't understand what it's like to be me, Granger. You can fight for justice, and everyone applauds. I fight, and they call it manipulation. You forgive, and they call it noble. I try to be better, and it's always too little, too late. The rawness in his voice silenced her. I'll fix this, he said hoarsely. I'll take the blame. I'll tell them the engagement was my idea alone. You'll do no such thing. I have to. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. You think sacrificing yourself will make me feel better? It won't. It'll make me hate you for underestimating me. Something broke in his expression, anger giving way to something more fragile. Then what do you want me to do? Stand beside me, she whispered. Not in front of me, not behind me, beside me. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, he nodded. Together then. Together. They faced the press that afternoon. A crowd gathered in the ministry atrium. Reporters, photographers, curious employees pretending not to eavesdrop. Draco stood beside her, his expression calm but unreadable. Hermione's pulse thundered as she stepped forward to speak. This engagement, she began, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, was never a matter of politics. It began under unusual circumstances, yes, but it became something neither of us expected. The crowd leaned in. Draco's gaze flicked toward her, faint surprise softening his features. She continued, If anyone doubts our sincerity, that's their right. But I ask only this, that we be judged not by who we were, but by what we choose to be now. When she finished, the room was silent. Draco stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Miss Granger has a gift for understatement. I won't deny I had ulterior motives at first. I needed to prove that the Malfoy name could mean something more than disgrace. What I didn't expect was that she'd prove it. To me, not the world. The cameras flashed. Hermione's throat tightened. Draco turned his head slightly toward her. You were never a shield, Hermione. You were a mirror. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The press conference ended in a blur. By the time they slipped out a side door, both were shaking from the effort of keeping composed. The corridor outside was empty, silent, except for the faint echo of their footsteps. Hermione finally stopped, leaning against the wall. You didn't have to say that, she murmured. I meant it, he replied. You shouldn't have. Too late. His hand brushed hers again, tentative, uncertain. She didn't pull away. The silence stretched, heavy and full. Then, softly, he said, You're still trembling. I'm angry. Liar. She looked up at him, and the look in his eyes undid her completely. That night, they didn't part ways immediately. He walked her home again, though neither said much. The city was quiet, the the cobblestones glistening from the earlier rain. When they reached her door, she hesitated. "This doesn't change anything," she said, trying to convince herself more than him. "The world still thinks this is pretend." He smiled faintly. "Let them. I know the difference." She swallowed hard. "Do you?" "I do now." Hermione turned the key in her door but didn't open it. "And what happens when the pretending ends?" Draco's voice softened, the answer simple and devastating. "Then I stop pretending I don't love you." Her breath caught. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said quietly. "I just don't expect you to believe it." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart hammering. "You've made a career out of impossible things, Malfoy. Why stop now?" He laughed, quietly, almost disbelievingly, and reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered there, tracing the edge of her jaw. "Good night, Hermione." "Good night, Draco." He stepped back, his eyes holding hers until the door closed between them. Only when she leaned against the wood, breath trembling, did she realize that everything had changed. Because love, real love, had never been part of the plan. And now, there was no plan left at all. The next morning began too bright, too ordinary for what had shifted between them. Hermione woke before dawn, sunlight streaming through her curtains, her thoughts already spinning. "Then I stop pretending I don't love you." The words had followed her into her dreams, wrapping around her heart like a charm she couldn't undo. She wanted to dismiss them as heat-of-the-moment emotion, the kind of confession people made when the world was crashing in around them. But she couldn't. Draco Malfoy didn't say things he didn't mean, not anymore, and that was the problem. All morning she moved through her routine mechanically, tea, parchment, reports, but her thoughts betrayed her. Every sip of tea tasted like the ghost of his voice. Every rustle of parchment reminded her of his hands. It was maddening. By mid-afternoon, she found herself outside his office door at the ministry, telling herself she was there for work, a lie she almost believed. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering briefly before he masked it with that infuriating calm. "Granger," he greeted, voice even. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Hermione's chin lifted. "We need to talk." "About the weather? Or about the part where I ruined everything by telling you the truth?" His bluntness stole her breath. "You didn't ruin anything." "Didn't I?" He rose from his chair, coming around the desk to stand in front of her. "You're shaking." "I'm angry." He smirked faintly. "You always are when you're terrified." Her heart thudded. "I'm not terrified." "Yes, you are," he said softly. "Because you feel it too." Hermione's throat went dry. "Draco." He stepped closer, just enough to blur the air between them. "You can say my name now. You've earned that." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You shouldn't have said what you said last night." "And yet," he murmured, "you came here to talk about it." Her composure faltered. "You can't love you?" His voice was quiet but steady. "Too late for that, Granger." It wasn't a declaration meant to impress her. It was an admission, a simple, unguarded truth, and somehow that made it worse. She turned away, struggling to breathe. "Do you even know what love is?" He was silent for a long moment. "Maybe not, but I know what it isn't." She looked back at him then, and the honesty in his eyes undid her. "I know it isn't the kind that makes you weaker," he said softly. "It isn't control or possession. It's standing beside someone even when it hurts, It's wanting them to have peace, even if it's not with you. The words hit too close. Draco. He exhaled, the faintest tremor breaking through his calm. You don't have to say anything. I didn't tell you to force your hand. I just needed you to know. Hermione stared at him, torn between fury, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. You have the worst timing imaginable. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. I've been told. And that inexplicably broke her. She laughed, a quiet, helpless sound that slipped into a sigh. I can't do this right now. He nodded once, the corner of his mouth twitching. Then don't. I'll wait. She hated how easily he said it, hated how her heart ached at the same time. The days that followed were an exquisite form of torture. They were careful, too careful. Every public appearance felt like walking a tightrope, smiles and scripted gestures, their every move dissected by the press. Yet beneath the glittering surface, their chemistry thrummed like an unspoken secret. At a dinner with the International Magical Council, Hermione accidentally brushed his hand while reaching for her glass. The touch was brief, harmless, but he froze. His fingers turned slightly, catching hers, holding for half a heartbeat before letting go. That night, she dreamt of him again. Not the cruel boy from Hogwarts, not the arrogant man from the early years after the war, but the one she knew now. The one who looked at her like she was the only thing holding his world together. When she woke, she hated herself for wanting that to be real. The scandal from the prophet hadn't faded, but it had shifted tone. Instead of whispers about lies, the papers now obsessed over passion. Photographers captured their every glance, every shared smile. One columnist even wrote, "The line between performance and affection seems dangerously thin for Britain's most talked-about couple." For once, the prophet wasn't wrong. One evening, as she left the ministry, she found Draco waiting outside. He didn't say a word, just offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. They walked through Diagon Alley in near silence, the bustle of the crowd around them muffled by the soft chill of dusk. When they reached the small park at the corner, empty except for a few flickering lamps, he stopped. "Do you ever think about what happens after?" he asked quietly. "After what?" "All of this. When the press gets bored. When the engagement ends." Hermione stared at the ground. "I try not to." "And if I asked you not to let it end?" Her breath caught. "Don't." "I mean it," he said, turning toward her. "We could make it real. Not for the headlines, not for appearances. For us." "Draco, I know you're afraid," he said softly. "I am too. But I'm more afraid of losing this, whatever this is, than I am of the entire world's opinion." Hermione's eyes burned. "You don't get it. I can't afford to be seen as someone's redemption project. Not yours, not anyone's." His voice cracked slightly. "You're not. You never were. You're the only thing that's made me believe I can be something else." The words broke through her defenses like light through glass. She wanted to fight, to deny, to retreat into logic. But he looked at her like he'd already seen every version of her. Angry, afraid, strong, fragile, and still wanted all of it. "Say something," he whispered. She took a trembling breath. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." He stepped closer, hesitated, and this time she didn't stop him. His lips found hers, softer than before, slower, as if both were afraid that moving too fast might shatter what they'd built. The kiss wasn't desperate. It was inevitable. When they pulled apart, Hermione's voice shook. "What are we doing?" "Something real," he murmured. "Finally." That night, Hermione didn't sleep. She stood by her window long after the moon had risen, replaying every word, every look. For the first time, she stopped trying to rationalize what she felt. This wasn't just attraction, or curiosity, or the strange magnetism of shared history. It was something deeper, something that scared her more than any curse ever had. She didn't know where it would lead, whether it would end in heartbreak or something far greater. All she knew was this: the performance was over, and what remained was terrifyingly, beautifully real. The world did not slow for them. It never did. If anything, the pace of life quickened after the second kiss. More invitations, more articles, more scrutiny. Every glance between them seemed to make headlines now. Malfoy and Granger, love beyond politics, read the Prophet's latest front page, the question mark hanging like bait for public speculation. Hermione tried to ignore it. She threw herself into work, scheduling meetings back to back, drowning herself in policy drafts and council hearings. But none of it worked. He was always there, in every thought, every quiet moment. And worse, she could feel him pulling away again. Not with words or actions. No, Draco was far too careful for that. But she sensed it. The way his smiles became fleeting. The way he hesitated before reaching for her hand in public. The way his letters arrived less often, each one shorter than the last. The pattern was familiar. The slow retreat before the collapse. Hermione told herself not to care, that she'd known from the start this would never last, that the world wasn't kind to stories like theirs, but she'd never been good at lying to herself. The breaking point came during a winter charity gala at the ministry. It was snowing outside, the soft kind that melted on your lashes. The ballroom was full of laughter, twinkling lights, and the sound of enchanted violins. Everyone was watching them. The perfect couple, the symbol of post-war harmony. Draco looked flawless, of course. Immaculate robes, calm composure, every movement measured. But when Hermione glanced at him, she saw it. The distance, the walls rising again. When he leaned close to whisper a perfunctory comment for the cameras, she whispered back, "You're doing it again." His jaw tightened. Doing what? Pulling away. "Not now," he muttered. "Yes, now," she hissed. "I'm not some ornament you parade for photographs." He turned to face her, his eyes flint and fire. "And what exactly do you want me to do, Granger? Announce to the entire ministry that I've gone and fallen in love with you, because that would end well." His words hit her like a blow. "You don't have to mock it," she said quietly. "I'm not mocking," he said, softer now. "I'm surviving." She stared at him, hurt flashing across her face. "You think that's what this is? Survival?" He didn't answer, and just like that, the warmth between them fractured into cold silence. She left before the night was over, ignoring the whispers as she slipped through the side corridor and out into the snow. Her heels clicked against the cobblestones, sharp and uneven, matching the rhythm of her pulse. She didn't hear him follow until his voice broke through the falling snow. "Hermione!" She stopped, but didn't turn. "Don't walk away," he said, his breath visible in the freezing air. She turned slowly. He stood a few paces behind her, his hair dusted with snow, his expression raw. "Why shouldn't I?" she asked quietly. "You always do." His eyes closed briefly. That's not fair. Isn't it? She whispered. Every time we get close, you run. You hide behind logic, fear, guilt, anything that lets you pretend you don't feel what you do. And what if I can't be what you need? Her voice trembled. I never asked you to be anything but honest. He looked at her then, really looked, like a man trying to memorize something he already knew he'd lose. Honesty, he said bitterly. Fine, here it is. I don't know how to love without destroying everything around me. I've tried to change, Hermione, but you deserve someone untouched by darkness, and that's never going to be me. Her eyes shone in the half-light. You think love is about being unbroken? You're wrong. It's about choosing someone even when you are. He flinched. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, she said, stepping closer. You complicate it because you're afraid of being happy, because you think you don't deserve it. He swallowed hard, snow melting on his lashes. Maybe I don't. Hermione's hand rose, brushing a snowflake from his cheek. Then let me decide that. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city around them was silent, the snow falling thicker now, muffling everything but their breathing. Then, quietly, he said, I don't want to hurt you. You already have, she replied, but I'd rather be hurt by something real than live with something fake. Something in him broke then. He reached out, his gloved hand finding hers, gripping it tightly as though anchoring himself. Tell me what you want, Hermione. Tell me, and I'll try. Her voice was barely a whisper. I want you to stop pretending you're not worth loving. The silence that followed was the kind that stretched time. Then he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his voice breaking against her ear. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. Then we'll learn together, she said. And for the first time, he didn't argue. The following weeks were quieter. There were still events, still expectations, still eyes watching from every corner, but something fundamental had changed. They no longer moved around each other like actors on a stage. The pretense had dissolved, replaced by something fragile but real. He came to her flat one evening after work, unannounced, bringing a bottle of wine and that guarded expression that meant he'd been thinking too much again. You could have sent an owl, she said, opening the door. I didn't trust myself not to change my mind on the way. She smiled faintly. Then come in before you do. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about books, policies, the ghosts that lingered behind both their names. At some point, she fell asleep against his shoulder. When she woke, the room was quiet, the fire dying down, and his hand was still holding hers. Draco Malfoy, who had spent half his life trying to build walls around himself, had fallen asleep beside her with his defenses undone. And in that stillness, she realized she was no longer afraid. But happiness, Hermione knew, was never simple. The world would not forgive easily. Rumors would come again. People would question their motives, and old wounds would reopen. Yet when she looked at him, his hands still tangled with hers, his breathing steady, she knew none of that mattered. Because somewhere between hate and forgiveness, between pretending and truth, they had found something worth holding on to. And even if it wasn't perfect, it was real. That, she thought as dawn lightened the horizon, was enough for now. Winter deepened, and with it came the quiet before the inevitable storm. For a few blissful weeks, Hermione let herself live in the fragile peace they'd built. It wasn't perfect, Nothing about them ever was, but it was real. Draco no longer hid behind formalities. He'd stopped calling her Granger altogether, and when she caught him watching her from across a crowded room, there was no longer any mask in his gaze. They were still pretending for the world, of course. The engagement was public, and everyone expected a grand wedding announcement soon. The ministry adored their story. It was poetic, a symbol of unity. But beneath the surface, they both knew the truth. It had started as a lie and turned into something too dangerous to name aloud. And though neither wanted to admit it, they were running out of time. The first crack appeared when the Daily Prophet published a new column. Malfoy Granger wedding. Delayed again. Trouble behind the golden facade? It was meant as gossip, harmless speculation, but the article carried a venomous edge. It hinted at deception, at political manipulation, at the idea that Hermione had tamed a Malfoy for power. By midday, her office was flooded with letters, some kind, most not. She stared at the stack of parchment, her jaw tight. "I hate that they still care more about your last name than what we've done," she muttered when Draco appeared at her door later that evening. He gave a weary half-smile. "They always will. The Malfoy name makes better headlines than reform policies." Hermione crossed her arms. "And you're just fine with that?" "I stopped expecting fairness a long time ago." His calmness infuriated her. "You can't keep surrendering to it. If you don't fight back, nothing will change." He met her gaze, quiet and steady. "And if I fight, you'll be the one who pays for it. That's what they want, to see me pull you down with me." She slammed the nearest drawer shut. "You think I haven't survived worse than gossip? I faced Death Eaters at 17. I can handle journalists." Draco exhaled, stepping closer. "This isn't about whether you can. It's about whether you should have to because of me." That was when she realized it. His distance, his restraint, his quiet sadness. He wasn't growing indifferent. He was preparing to let her go, and that terrified her more than anything. That night, Hermione found herself unable to sleep. She paced her sitting room, the engagement ring glinting coldly on her finger. The weight of it suddenly felt unbearable. Before she could think better of it, she grabbed her cloak and disapparated. She appeared in front of Malfoy Manor, her heart pounding. The night was bitterly cold. Frost glittered across the lawns like powdered silver. The massive doors loomed before her, ancient and unwelcoming, but she didn't hesitate. When the door opened, Draco stood there, startled but composed. He wore no jacket, only a dark jumper and the same haunted look that had lingered in his eyes all week. "Hermione," he said quietly, "it's late." "I couldn't sleep," she replied, "and apparently neither can you." He stepped aside, letting her in without a word. The hall was dim, the fire in the drawing room flickering low. She turned to face him. "You're planning something." Draco's expression flickered. Guilt, surprise, resignation. "You always were too observant for my own good. Don't deflect. What are you doing?" He sighed, sinking into one of the armchairs. "I've been speaking with the minister. If I step down from the Unity Initiative, it will take pressure off you. The press will lose interest." Hermione's heart lurched. "You're quitting! Draco, you can't—" "I can," he interrupted gently. "I've served my purpose. The initiative will survive without me. You'll still have everything you've built." She stared at him, disbelief giving way to fury. "You arrogant, infuriating man. You think I care about my reputation more than I care about you? His voice was low, almost tender. You should. I don't. Hermione! No! She snapped, crossing the room in 2 strides. Don't you dare tell me what I should feel. You've spent so long convincing yourself you're poison that you can't see what's right in front of you. He rose then, tall and tense, every emotion he'd buried flickering in his eyes. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, she cut in. You're scared. Scared of being happy. Scared that it won't last. But it's not your decision alone anymore. Her voice broke. You don't get to love me and then decide it's safer not to. Draco's composure crumbled. You think I want this? Yes, she cried, because it's easier than believing you might deserve me. For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing hard, the air thick with everything they'd left unsaid. Then Draco moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched her face. You don't make this easy, he whispered. I'm not supposed to. His thumb brushed her cheek. You should hate me for this. I tried, she said softly. It didn't work. Something in him gave way. In one fluid motion, he pulled her into his arms. The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. It was desperate, raw, filled with everything they'd fought against. When they broke apart, their foreheads rested together, breaths uneven. You can't fix me, Hermione, he said. I'm not trying to, she murmured. I just don't want you to give up on yourself. They spent the night talking by the fire. No grand confessions, no promises, just quiet honesty. Draco told her about the weight he still carried, the people who refused to forgive, the constant scrutiny, the fear of becoming the man his father had been. Hermione listened, her fingers tracing idle patterns against his wrist, grounding him. When dawn came, soft light spilling through the curtains, Hermione realized something had changed. Not everything was healed, not yet, but there was understanding now. As she rose to leave, Draco caught her hand. Stay, he said, his voice rough. Just a little longer. She smiled faintly. I'll stay. And she did. They sat in silence, watching the sunrise gild the frost-covered garden. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was real. By the time she finally returned to London, Hermione knew what she had to do. The press could speculate, the world could whisper, but she wouldn't hide anymore. At the next public meeting, she stood beside Draco, not as his pretend fiancé, but as his equal. When the reporters asked if the rumors were true, she didn't hesitate. Yes, she said clearly. We started as a lie, but somewhere along the way, we became something else, something that matters. The room erupted with noise. Questions, flashes, disbelief. But she didn't waver. Draco's hand found hers beneath the podium. Warm, steady, real. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what came next, they had already won something greater than approval. They had chosen each other, not out of necessity, not for show, but because, finally, neither could pretend otherwise. Spring arrived reluctantly that year, washing away the grey skies of winter with sunlight that felt like a promise. For the first time in months, Hermione could breathe. The pressure of secrecy had lifted. The facade was gone. The truth, messy, imperfect, and entirely real, was out. But freedom came with its own storm. The public reaction was divided. Half of the wizarding world called it progress, a symbol of what reconciliation could look like. The other half called it betrayal. Granger's gone too far, sneered one headline. From war heroine to Malfoy mistress. Hermione pretended the words didn't sting, but they did. Every time she walked into the ministry, she felt the whispers trail behind her like ghosts. Draco bore it differently. He'd always been good at indifference. He'd had a lifetime to practice it. But Hermione saw through it. The rigid posture, the slight tremor in his hand when he read the morning papers. He cared, even if he refused to show it. And that made her love him more. The tension came to a head one morning when Hermione found a letter on her desk, unsigned, but written in elegant, precise handwriting. Do you truly believe redemption can be inherited? Or are you naive enough to think the sins of his father don't live in him still? The parchment trembled in her hands. She didn't show it to Draco. He didn't need another reason to retreat into guilt. Instead, she burned it and pretended her heart wasn't racing. By the time Draco appeared in her doorway that afternoon, she'd almost convinced herself she was fine. "You've been quiet today," he said, stepping inside. "I'm working," she replied without looking up. He closed the door behind him. "You only say that when you're hiding something." "Not everything is about you," she said, a little too sharply. He tilted his head. "Maybe, but this feels like it is." Hermione exhaled, setting her quill down. "I got a letter, another one. Someone doesn't like the idea of me. Us." His eyes darkened. "Show me." "I burned it." "Of course you did," he muttered. "Because heaven forbid you let anyone else fight your battles." "Draco." "No, don't," he said, pacing now. "You shouldn't have to deal with this because of me. It was a mistake to—" "Don't you dare say it," she cut in, rising to her feet. "Don't you dare call this a mistake again." He stopped, breathing hard. "You think I want to? You think I don't wake up every morning terrified that I'll ruin you just by existing next to you?" She stepped closer. "You don't ruin me, Draco. You remind me why I fight." The words stopped him cold. For a moment, the air between them crackled. Pain, affection, fear all tangled together. Then his shoulders dropped, the fight draining out of him. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Maybe not," she admitted, voice softening. "But you have me anyway." His lips curved into something fragile, almost a smile. "You're relentless, Granger." "I'm consistent," she corrected. "And I'm not going anywhere." Their relationship grew quieter after that. Less spectacle, more substance. They spent evenings at her flat, cooking together badly and laughing when spells went wrong. She teased him for his obsession with oversalting soup. He teased her for her inability to sit still for more than 10 minutes. There were arguments too. He had a habit of withdrawing when the world grew loud. She had a habit of pushing when he wasn't ready to talk. But they learned, slowly, imperfectly, to meet in the middle. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of hearings, Hermione arrived home to find Draco asleep on her sofa, still in his ministry robes, an open book resting on his chest. The sight made her heart ache. She knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. He stirred, blinking groggily. "You're home," he murmured. "I am. Did I fall asleep waiting for you again?" "Yes," she said, smiling softly. "You're terrible at pretending you don't worry." He hummed, half asleep, and reached for her hand. "I worry because you're worth it." The simplicity of it undid her. A few weeks later came the annual spring gala, a ministry tradition Hermione had once enjoyed and now dreaded. Attendance was mandatory for both of them. She spent the evening feeling the weight of 1,000 gazes. Some smiled, others sneered, but all of them watched. Draco stood beside her, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Only she could feel the tension in the way his hand rested lightly on her back, a silent promise that he wouldn't let her face the crowd alone. When the speeches ended, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Hermione hesitated, but Draco extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said quietly. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. They moved together in perfect rhythm, slow, deliberate, and heartbreakingly intimate. Around them, the whispers faded, replaced by the swell of violins. For a few minutes, it was just the two of them, the girl who once saw the world in black and white, and the boy who'd spent his life in the grey between. When the music ended, applause filled the hall. Hermione looked up, breathless. Draco's eyes met hers, soft and unguarded. "Let them talk," she whispered. "They will anyway," he said. "Then let them talk about something true." He smiled faintly, leaning down just enough for only her to hear. "You really do like provoking them." "I learned from the best." Later that night, when they finally escaped the crowd and stepped out into the cool night air, Draco exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath all evening. "Are you all right?" she asked. He nodded, though his jaw tightened. "It's strange, isn't it? All my life, I thought reputation was everything. Now I couldn't care less what they say, as long as you're beside me." Hermione's heart clenched. "You're allowed to care. You just can't let it own you." He looked at her for a long time, the lamplight catching in his pale eyes. "When did you start believing in me?" She smiled. "When you stopped pretending not to care." He reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you refused to let me hate myself." "Draco." He kissed her before she could speak, slow and steady, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for permission because it had already been earned. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens next, Hermione, don't let them take this from us." "I won't," she promised. "Neither will you." And as they stood together under the lamplight, the world around them buzzing with distant noise and gossip and doubt, Hermione realized that the fight for their love wasn't about proving it to anyone else. It was about choosing it again and again, despite the fear, despite the past, despite everything. And for the first time in her life, she was certain she wouldn't lose. Summer found them changed. The scandal that had once dominated the wizarding papers had burned itself out, replaced by new gossip and new names. The world had moved on, but Draco and Hermione had not. They were still learning what it meant to exist without masks, without pretending for the benefit of anyone else, what it meant to be. The transition was not seamless. For all their affection, they still clashed, often intensely, sometimes over trivial things that spiraled into deeper wounds neither of them knew how to articulate. Draco had never learned to argue without retreating. Hermione had never learned when to stop pushing. Yet every argument ended the same way, not with victory, but with understanding. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, that understanding grew into peace. One evening in June, they returned to Malfoy Manor for the first time since their engagement had become real. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming roses, The gardens glowed gold in the sunset. Hermione paused at the gates, her hand resting on the ironwork. "It feels different now," she murmured. Draco followed her gaze. "Because you're not here as a prop this time." She smiled faintly. "I don't think I ever was." He laughed under his breath. "No, you were never anyone's prop. You just let me believe you might be until I learned better." The gates opened with a soft creak. Inside, the manor was quieter than she remembered. No echo of judgment, no ghost of the war. The portraits still watched them, but their painted faces seemed less cold now, as if they too were trying to learn forgiveness. They had come, Draco had said, to meet Narcissa. Hermione had expected nerves. Instead, she felt a strange calm. Narcissa Malfoy greeted her with grace and a faint, cautious smile. She was smaller than Hermione remembered, her beauty softened by time and loss. "So," Narcissa said, gesturing for them to sit, "it seems my son has finally managed something impossible." Draco raised an eyebrow. "Rehabilitating the family name?" "Falling in love with someone who still believes in decency," she said lightly. He rolled his eyes, but Hermione caught the flicker of affection beneath the sarcasm. Dinner was polite, but there were moments, small, fragile moments, where Hermione saw the tension ease between mother and son. Narcissa asked her questions about her work, and Hermione, to her own surprise, found herself laughing. When they left, Narcissa touched Hermione's hand. "You've given him peace," she said quietly. "That is no small thing." Hermione didn't know what to say, so she simply squeezed her hand in reply. Outside, Draco exhaled. "That went better than expected. Your mother's lovely. She terrifies half the ministry." "She terrifies them because she's smarter than all of them," Hermione said, smiling. "Remind you of anyone?" He looked at her sidelong. "I walked right into that." "Yes, you did." They spent the rest of the evening walking through the gardens. Fireflies shimmered above the pond, their reflections dancing on the water's surface. It was quiet, too quiet almost, after the chaos of the last year. "Do you ever think about how it started?" Hermione asked softly. "How much we hated each other?" Draco chuckled. "You didn't hate me. You disapproved of my existence. And you were a vile, arrogant boy who called me names." "I was." His voice softened. "And I've never regretted anything more." She reached out, lacing her fingers through his. "You've changed." "I had help," he said simply. They stopped beneath an old willow tree, its branches cascading around them like a curtain of silver leaves. The air smelled of grass and rain and memory. Draco turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You once told me love was about choosing someone even when you're broken," he said quietly. "Do you still believe that?" "I do." "Then I want to choose you." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Hermione blinked. "Draco?" "I don't mean in the way we started, not out of desperation or performance. I mean..." He hesitated, his fingers tightening around hers. "I want to spend my life proving that the man you believed I could be is the man I really am." Her heart swelled painfully. "Are you asking me?" He dropped to one knee before she could finish, the gesture unpracticed but earnest. No grand speeches, no crowd, just the two of them beneath the willow. "I never thought I'd have a life after the war," he said softly. "Then you walked back into it and ruined every plan I had for solitude. You made me want something better, something honest. So, yes, I'm asking." He looked up, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. Will you marry me? For real this time? Tears stung her eyes, blurring the world into soft light and shadow. You absolute fool, she whispered, laughing through the tears. I'll take that as a yes. Of course it's a yes. He stood, and she pulled him into a kiss, tender and trembling, and full of everything they had fought for. The air hummed with magic, quiet and profound, like the world itself was exhaling. When they finally broke apart, Draco brushed a tear from her cheek. You're crying again. Get used to it, she said, smiling. You do that to me. News of their engagement, the real one, spread quickly, but this time Hermione didn't care. She didn't bother reading the articles or the gossip. The only thing that mattered was the peace she felt each morning when she woke to find Draco beside her, his arm draped loosely around her waist, his breathing slow and even. There would still be challenges. The world didn't forget easily, but they had stopped living for the world's forgiveness. They had each other, and that was enough. On their wedding day, the ceremony was small. Just friends, a few family members, and sunlight filtering through the enchanted glass of the Burrow's garden pavilion. Harry gave Hermione away, grinning through his speech. Narcissa cried quietly when Draco said his vows. When it was over and the applause faded, Hermione turned to her husband, the words still strange, still miraculous, and whispered, Do you remember what you said to me the night this began? He smirked. Which time? I said many foolish things. You said, It's all pretend. His expression softened. And you made me a liar. She smiled, her fingers brushing his wedding band. Good. As the music started and he pulled her into the first dance, Hermione realized that this was not the end of their story. It never would be. They had built something messy and raw, stitched together from old wounds and fragile hope. But it was theirs. And when Draco whispered, I love you, against her hair, she finally said it back without fear. I love you too. The words settled between them like magic, real, unbreakable, and eternal. For the first time in their long, tangled history, they were no longer pretending. They were home.
I hope my story helped you rest. We are always in a hurry, always running somewhere, and often we miss the moment to simply enjoy a favorite story. If you are here at this point, I'm very grateful that you stayed with me until the very end. This story was written with the help of a cat, and he sends you his greetings.